Welcome everyone to our CodeX group meeting. So we have two great presentations lined up for today. We have Josef Maroszczak and Ludwig Bull from CodeQuant, who will be joining us remotely from the UK. And then we have Stephen Stewart, Jared Harrell, Linda Selke, and Olga Mack from QuantStamp, who are here in the room with us, and who will be presenting after the CodeQuant team. Before we got started, I wanted to see if there's any updates that anyone here in the room has, or anyone online. I think one important update is that Jameson Dempsey is here with us. He's our brand new residential CodeX fellow and really a leader in the legal innovation and legal hack community. Jameson, you just want to say?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join CodeX as a residential fellow for the next year. Just briefly on my background, I've been practicing technology and telecommunications law, New York City and Washington, D.C., and working on low-income broadband, rural broadband, net neutrality, privacy, and other issues like that. On the side, I've helped to grow the legal hackers community, which is the largest grassroots legal innovation community in the world, with over 110 chapters on every continent except Antarctica, but I promise we're working on that.
Great.
And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much.
Super, welcome. Okay, so any other updates? And if you want to hear us online, you have to unmute yourself. Last week, apologies for last week's disruption of our meeting. About halfway through, we had we were hacked, I would say. We had to stop our broadcast, but we did videotape the second half of the meeting. And if you wanted to see the simple rights, Michael Sander, I think, from Simple.
Sung, yeah.
Michael Sung from. Hey, welcome. Come in. From Simple Rights, this presentation, we put a link to it into the announcement for this week's presentation. You can actually see all our previous presentations in our CodeX YouTube channel. So check that out. But yeah, if there are no other updates, I think we should turn it over to QuantQuant. Sorry, no, CodeQuant. Today we have the Quant named startups here today. This is great. All right, so you're Josef or Ludwig?
I'm Ludwig. Hi everyone,
okay.
Very nice to be here.
Hey,
I'm very sorry, Joseph sent his regards. Unfortunately, he's fallen ill, so I'll be presenting alone today. And if you guys are ready, I'm ready to get started as well. So I can just
Let's do it.
off. Fantastic. Okay, let me set my timer here. Okay, great. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be able to share a little bit about the work and also the technology we've been developing at CodeQuant. And I have some slides. I'll show you those. We're just going to share my screen here. You should be able to see the presentation now. Everything good?
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, great. So for today's presentation, I'm going to be talking a lot about quantifying legal risk. And this is really about what we do at CodeQuant. We want to become the world's premier service for quantifying legal risk. And there's a couple of things we're going to go into today. And I don't only want to talk about our product and about our platform, but I want to give this a little bit of a research background as well. So I have a background in law, and I'm interested obviously in building this business, but I'm also very interested in understanding what exactly the technology that we've been developing and the success that we've had means for legal theory, because I think a lot of it means a great deal, and it's not always debated enough. So we're going to walk through a little bit about AI and litigation, and specifically how we think the achievements of AI reflect on the practice of litigation. Then we'll be talking about the business applications, specifically in our case, the groups that we focus on. We can do a quick demo of the platform as well, which we set up. And then at the end, obviously, I'd be very happy to have some really tough questions. So, if you have a great question that will shatter everything I say, fantastic. Just please don't forget it and ask me at the end. Okay. AI and litigation. All right. So I have here, it says hunches, hearsay, and solid numbers, but the reason why we think that this is a great area for AI, why litigation is a fantastic area for statistical analysis and for AI, is because it completely lacks transparency. And I'm going to start this with a couple of questions that we've had at CorkOne for a long time. Now, about our company, we actually have been around not for very long, and we started and developed out of a research project that we were doing while studying at the University of Cambridge. And we essentially are trying to find a way, or we're trying to find a way to answer these three really big question marks. Now, some of you might be familiar with these particular projects and papers. These are all papers that use some form of AI to predict case outcomes, right? So you have a data set that has historical data about decisions made by certain courts, and you train a model on it and you try to predict future outcomes. Now, it's also very interesting to compare the machine outcomes with the human outcomes. And here are three papers, the first one from 2004, the other one from 2017, and the other one was our own study, which we did last year. And the results are truly bizarre. And so far, we don't really have a very good explanation of this. So if I can just completely give you the point that I think is truly bizarre, is that both in the Supreme Court prediction project from 2004, and as well as in our study, and then also in Martin Katz's study, machines outperform humans at predicting trial outcomes. And that's really weird because, for example, in the Supreme Court prediction project and also in Martin Katz's paper, there was very little information about the facts and the law of each case given to the machine, right? So when we were starting to research this area and doing this in Cambridge, we came across these papers and we thought to ourselves, how is it possible that an AI can actually outperform human lawyers in predicting case outcomes when the machine has little to no information about the facts and law of the case, whereas the lawyers have a huge, huge academic expertise in that particular area. So this is essentially where we think AI is a fantastic tool for litigation, because it's actually able to outperform humans, right? And it's able to do so because the reasoning process that it uses is actually relatively counterintuitive. So, maybe you know this particular figure. Does anybody know what this is?
Daleks.
Yes, it's a Dalek, exactly, from Doctor Who, right? And the Dalek runs around and just says, exterminate, exterminate, and explain, right? And this is something, this is kind of how we feel, right? Because ever since doing our project as well, let me go back a slide, where we predicted outcomes of ombudsman decisions from the UK Financial Ombudsman Service, where our algorithm achieved 86% accuracy and the lawyers performed rather poorly. We've been walking around asking the legal community to explain, how is it possible that machines achieve these really high performances when they do not have access to the kind of information that lawyers would think is required in order to predict outcomes. Now, there's one explanation that we've come up with, and this is basically our theory as to how these algorithms work, right? And this is essentially a dual taxonomy, right? So we distinguish for our use cases between easy legal cases and hard cases. And this is a distinction that every lawyer who's done any sort of jurisprudence knows about, right? Easy cases are those cases where there's a clear legal position, the facts are relatively common, and usually find these in kind of the lower courts, initial courts, first instance courts, and so on. And here, this is where, of course, legal theory works really well. Now, there haven't been that many studies on this particular area of law, but we would imagine that if you ask an AI to predict outcomes of lower court decisions regarding, breach of contract or something, that an AI would not be able to outperform a human lawyer. Maybe because human lawyers have less time, maybe because they haven't done their homework as well, but overall speaking, there should not be a major difference. However, there is a completely different area of litigation, and this is the area that concerns hard cases. These are cases where there is no obvious legal answer, right? The facts might be somewhat unusual. They might not have been litigated before. And of course, you find these kind of cases only in the higher courts, because they're only appealed and they only actually are allowed to get appealed when there is no clear legal answer. And what we found, and the way that we explain these results, is that the AI is able to read the decision maker. The AI is really well able to understand the judge and their personal preferences, whereas the lawyers focus on the qualitative legal analysis of a case in the higher courts. The AI understands what the judge thinks. right? And the judge's pattern in decision-making over time is really important when there isn't a clear answer from the law. So most of the time in these projects, the AI doesn't understand the law because the AI actually has no information about the law, but it understands historical decision-making patterns by the judges, right? And these are the hard cases. These are the ones that the AI will always outperform humans at, and that's what we focus on. Okay, let's quickly, I'm already at 7 minutes, so let's go quickly. Implications for legal theory. Well, it's really, really terrible, actually, because it means that case outcomes are really heavily dependent on decision makers, right? So when you go into higher courts, in a lot of cases, it's going to be about what the judge thinks about that particular case. And it's not the case that there's a simple, clear legal answer or some objective, legal rationale that will determine the case, but it's about the person making the decision, and the judicial discretion comes to the foreground, right? And we think that's really problematic for justice, because how can you have justice when you don't treat like cases alike, right? Fundamental maxim of any kind of jurisprudence, you have to treat like cases alike. Here you've got H.L.A. Hart, who argued this on the concept of law. If you don't treat like cases alike, justice will not be able to have, you won't be able to have justice in that legal system. So when the decisions are dependent on the decision maker, then we do not have this objective, clear legal answer that we need. So that's a little bit of the research and theoretical background. That's why we think, that's our vision, right? That's why we care about our work, because we think fundamentally litigation, especially in the higher courts, isn't transparent and doesn't work the way that we think it does. Okay, moving on quickly to business applications. How do we use this in practice? Yes, well, we use it to help our clients save money. And specifically, there's one group which is absolutely fantastic for us, and which is also super fascinating from a research point of view. And this is, of course, litigation funding, right? So you probably all know this, but litigation funders are basically large companies that are funded from different institutional investors, family investors, etc. And they invest in cases and then take a share of the proceeds, right? So let's say you want to sue VW for the diesel scandal, but you don't really have enough money to sue VW. So a litigation funder will provide you with the funds. You then win the case, and obviously then you pay a share of the proceeds to the litigation funder. Now, litigation funding is a really currently bizarre market, right? Because there's a couple of firms in the world. It's around a $70 billion, £70 billion market worldwide. And a lot of the firms are relatively small while they're handling, $3 billion in funding, right? And so it's essentially right now, litigation funders are still able to cherry pick a lot of good cases that they think will be won. And they obviously pick a lot of very high value commercial cases. And 10 years ago, this really wasn't much of a thing, right? This has been, in the past 5 years, litigation funding has just exploded. And a lot of these litigation funders have had astronomical returns, up to 150% return on investment, right? So that's really great. What we do for these guys is we help them predict settlements, which I'll get to in a second, and also trial outcomes. And something we're moving on to increasingly is streamlining new cases that are coming in and helping them identify the right case for investment. Now, this is, I think, a super interesting slide. I took this straight out of IMF Bentham, which is one of the largest litigation funders in the world, started in Australia. And what I find completely bizarre, honestly, and I would love to have your thoughts on this, is this particular graphic, right? 157 cases completed in terms of investment, of which 128 were settled, right? 128 cases were settled. The others went to trial. Now, 14 of those were won and 15 were lost. So when they go to trial, they lose more often than they win. Now, my question is, why do litigation funders settle so much? And my second question is, why, when they go to court, do they lose more than they win? Now, this is something that we will probably only discover the answer to over the next years. But, my first thought of this, and this is really, I'd love to have your thoughts, but my first thought for this was, okay, well, when you settle, that means you have a quicker turnover of your capital, and it's a lot more predictable because you simply sit down, make an agreement, and then money comes back and you're fine, right? But on the other hand, if I was a litigation funder and if I'm in the position where I can cherry pick very good cases for commercial investment, why would I want to settle? I mean, you know, settlements, maybe 80% is of the damages that you get in the end, right? So, you know, that's a huge, that's a lot of money that you don't get when you don't go to trial. And interestingly enough, through some court cases, funding agreements between litigation funders and solicitors and lawyers have also become public. And they really care to put into those agreements that the lawyers settle at the first possible opportunity, right? So, you know, I think honestly that litigation funders are a little bit afraid of going to trial. And this completely reflects what we've heard anecdotally from our clients. You know, some super large litigation funders in the world, when we met them, they just said, look, when it goes to trial, we think it's 50-50, right? I mean, these are guys who vet thousands of claims every year and pick maybe 50, right? And they really think that when the case goes to trial, it's almost, you know, 50-50, 50% they win, 50% they lose. So this is an area where we're working a lot with our clients in order to help them understand litigation risk. And this goes back to what we had in the earlier slide, which clearly seems to suggest that this qualitative analysis performed by lawyers in order to predict litigation outcomes might not be the best approach, right? And I think that when litigation funders tell us that, you know, that it's 50-50 when they go to court, this reflects a lot the fact that they don't really know what happens, right? And we think the AI is able to figure this out because it reads the judge rather than the statute book. Okay, moving forward to the future development of litigation funding market, which is again our main client group. So we think there's going to be a couple, you know, these are the three main things that we think is going to happen. So one is an increase in risk appetite that has to happen simply because there's more and more money available to be invested, and there are simply less and less claims that are useful for investment, right? So right now they're cherry picking the absolute best, easy to win cases and settle. Over the next years, they're going to have to increase their risk appetite, and they're still going to be able to make money, but they will have to go for cases that are more risky. Secondly, we think that once this becomes more transparent, especially because it's made transparent by Court Quant, more cases will go to trial, right? Because as soon as you start understanding and being able to quantify legal risk at trial, the more likely you are then to get your full award. And thirdly, there is a huge, completely uncovered spectrum of the litigation funding market in the lower value amount, right? Most litigation funders, if your claim's not worth £5 million, no one's going to go for it. Now we're seeing already increasingly that there are new litigation funders who go down to £250,000. But what if your claim's only £10,000, right? So the reason why currently there's no litigation funding option for those claimants is because it's simply uneconomical for litigation funders to do this because the cost of vetting these claims is too high. Here, technology like the one that we provided, Court Quant, will help to bring down the price of vetting these claims and make it much more available to the general public. Okay, almost done here, 15 minutes, let's see. Okay, another huge client group for us is AT, BT, LEI. So after the event insurance in the US, this is often called legal expenses insurance. So an insurance company that, you know, gives underwrites an insurance policy for somebody who wants to sue someone. And here the same thing, we evaluate the lawyer competence by looking through court records and seeing how successful they are at settling and winning cases. And we also help them understand litigation risk in those particular circumstances. Okay, platform demo. I'm conscious of time, I'm almost at the end here. I'm just gonna give you a really quick rundown. So this is a page where you can predict cases, and essentially when you predict them, then you get the entire factor analysis, you get outcome probabilities, you receive the judge analysis, litigator analysis, and also for this particular demo we're showing you today, you also have firm prob and, you know, outcome probabilities for different lawyers. And it's actually not always the same as the win rate, which we think is an additional added value of our platform. Okay, moving on to the last slide. Conclusion, what does this all mean? So, okay, the general macro trend that we think is happening in legal technology is simply, and you see this also with legal innovation and litigation funding, is in the future, a stricter enforcement of legal rules will be possible, right? So often, everybody who's a lawyer knows this, a right accrues to do something and nothing happens. This can be in crime, this can be in breach of contract, you know, whatever. Often no consequences follow, simply because it's either uneconomical or impossible to actually monetize or bring that claim. Legal rules are breached constantly, right? Maybe 95% of claims that could be brought are not brought. And it's simply because it's uneconomical. And with technology, we will be able to bring those claims. So, okay, that brings me to the end. 60 minutes 50, that seems all right. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention. And I'd be very happy to connect with all of you by email, telephone, LinkedIn, whatever. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you, Ludwig. Thank you. Great. Where do you get your data about the judges and their decisions, and then the lawyer's performance too? And how do you define whether a settlement was a successful settlement or not?
Right. So the sources of data depends on the country. In the US, obviously the PACER system is fantastic. In the UK, there are a couple of public databases as well. We work mostly with judgments. And one thing that we like to that we're a little bit proud of is the fact that we actually go into those judgments and look at them really closely, right? Because it's a common thing in legal technology that, oh, there's just not enough data. But actually, if you look at the amount of detail of information that is in judgments, it's absolutely fascinating. For example, settlements, and to get your second question, settlement data is something that's super hard to get, right? Because you imagine that only law firms have it. But if you look closely at the judgments and if you structure them well, you will also be able to create an amazing settlement data set. As regards, settlement, whether or not it was a success, right now what we're focusing on is simply a lawyer's ability to reach a settlement. So it's a binary question for us, right? Is this person able to get a settlement, or did it have to go to trial, right? So whether or not it's a qualitatively good settlement is not right now on our radar. But generally speaking, for our clients, when it's not, there are only so many settlements you can get, and a lawyer's ability to just get a settle and avoid trial sometimes is much more important for the decision than whether or not they achieve the best settlement possible.
Okay, thanks. Other questions for Ludwig?
What happens to your analysis if a motion is made to disqualify a judge and they get moved to a different forum or judge? Do you then rerun your analysis and the financier says, oops, we bet on that horse, now we got a new one?
So you're asking, just to make sure I'm understanding the question correctly, so if a judge is disqualified from a court, and let's say there's a case pending with that judge, and then we have to, well, if that's the case, we would rerun the analysis with a new judge, right? That's not really that much of a problem. It's just simply a question of, it doesn't really matter what court the judge is in. We have a specific profile judge, and if he's disqualified and there's a new judge that replaces him, we will probably also have a specific profile for that judge, so we just rerun the analysis with the new judge. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, but the guy that funded it based on the judge may not be too happy when you come back and say, oops, new judge, lower probability. It's in the data.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that would of course be awful for a litigation funder, but that's not our fault, right? It just happens.
Understood.
That a new judge would appear, right?
Okay.
So your business model is to license the service to litigation funders? That's the
exactly.
Yearly subscription.
Yeah, so we have licensing options for litigation funders and insurance companies.
Cool. All right. Any other questions for Ludwig?
So actually, I just wanted to go back and clarify what you said about data sets. So you don't access the proprietary, I'm trying to conclude from what you said, you construct your own data sets. You don't have to rely, say, on an ALM or any of these proprietary or private data providers for verdicts and settlements?
Exactly. We scrape all of the judgments, right, wherever we can get them from public databases, and then we structure them. And honestly, a lot of the time, that's a better option than going to one of the main data providers, because they simply don't have the data sets in the way that we need them for our analysis, right? And this is where AI is super useful, because we simply, not only do we use AI in the analysis of the claim, but we also use it to just go through thousands of judgments and extract the right information and structure it into our own data set.
And which jurisdictions, the UK or US as well?
Yeah, UK and US, that's our main areas. We're looking a lot at Switzerland now, but it's obviously a data-driven exercise, and only so many countries have published this, right? For example, in Germany, if you find the name of a lawyer in a judgment, it's illegal, right? So you can't actually do that there.
Interesting. So I assume for the US at least, you would not try to ingest all the data from pay stubs. That's a cost prohibitive exercise, right? You would go very targeted. If you have a project for your client, you would look at who are the lawyers and the judges, and then go very targeted into that database.
Exactly, right? So for specific projects, we might have to buy more data, but there are fantastic resources out there like Court Listener, which allows you to download millions of judgments from hundreds of courts, right?
Right.
And then, I mean, sure, it is to some extent cost prohibitive to buy tons of data for particular issues, but if you really make an effort to structure the data that is available for free well, you can go a long way. And I think that this is really underestimated because, you know, we work with a lot of legal tech companies, and I'm a little bit tired of hearing, oh yeah, you only have the judgments. The judgments are fantastic. You just have to sit down and look at them, right? It's all there.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mike Listeners, I mean, the Court Listener project has really been, it's a very, very valuable resource. And he's doing really great work. So shout out to Mike Listener for putting that online.
He presented, so we have a question from our remote audience. Laverne Pritchard writes, do you provide this to law firms or individual litigants other than insurance companies? One-time use, cost?
First question, we also provide it to law firms, but the use case there is more for law firms that are smaller and that don't take on every case, right? Because again, we quantify legal risk, and a lot of law firms, you know, that's kind of useful for a client, but they also like getting a case and keeping it, right? So some smaller law firms that we work with only act like litigation, like boutique litigation law firms, only actually take on cases where they think they can win, especially if there's a conditional fee arrangement. So we do work with law firms, but our main focus is litigation funding and specific types of insurance. Second question, one-off. So most of our users do not need one-off, don't need just a one-off analysis. This is something down the line we might want to provide to general consumers, right? Because of course you might have a case and you just want to know how good your odds are, and you just put this into the machine. Technologically speaking, that's a bit more challenging because it's a huge spectrum. And also right now, again, we're focusing on large institutions and large companies. Third question, cost. Send me an email.
Okay. All right. So did you put your email on your screen, actually?
Yes, I did. So I can write in the chat as well. It's cto@courtquant.com.
I have a question. If I
Oh, here's another question. Go ahead.
Okay, I have no legal background. I'm a computer scientist. So I'm asking a question so I'm imagining you can predict legal outcomes. Is there a future where AI can replace legal decision makers?
Amazing question. Yes, and I think it's a two-step process. The first step is making what happens in litigation transparent and actually figuring out what's going on, right? Because we don't actually perfectly know how these decisions are reached, and that's reflected in the fact that lawyers sometimes don't know how to predict these outcomes. And what we're going to find is what we've been finding. We're working on a project now in Switzerland, which is understanding bias, and judges are biased. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make transparent what happens, and then, we can once we're able to predict, let's say, outcomes with 100% accuracy, we could just replace that system. But then, of course, we're replicating the same biases. So what you would want to do in that step between is you'd want to actually make the system better, right? And then you can make it quick and automated. And that's absolutely necessary, because I'm sure that every single person right now sitting in that room and listening to us has been in a situation where they've been wronged legally, right? Where they've seen a crime occur and nothing has happened, because the justice system is slow, it's inefficient, it's very intimidating, right? We've all been in those situations. And this is why technology for case outcome predictions has a huge, huge meaning for the rule of law, because it will actually enable us to apply laws in the way that we wrote them, because otherwise we don't have to have laws if we're not actually able to apply them. So to answer the question in one sentence, yes, I do think we can automate judicial decision-making at some point. It's a long way away politically, and we'll have to make it better before we actually completely implement it, I think.
One quick question, getting back to who you market to, how come, assuming you haven't marketed to corporate legal departments or legal operations teams within client client sides, this could be a benchmarking tool for use with their outside firms.
Absolutely, right? So by benchmarking, do you mean benchmarking this against other cases that they have, or?
Well, there could be a variety of uses. I guess it just flashed, and maybe I'm off on this, but they could say, hey, what does our, machine AI tell us, and how well do our human firms actually perform?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, right?
Often in big departments, you see annual reviews of various outcomes, and they are benchmarked. I'm not sure how good is their data set, but it is absolutely true that the Fortune 500 companies do an annual review of all their cases.
Exactly. So this could be used as part of that process, or for however they want to do their analytics to decide if they even want to take on a case.
Exactly. So for law firms, it's really, at least from our experience, been about early case assessment so far, right? Because down the line, there's a clear machinery and clear rules of how they do things. But when a new case comes in, somebody's being sued or somebody wants to sue someone, just to get an immediate overview of what the case is like, what the litigators like, what the other parties like. That's what's usually useful for law firms from our perspective.
Right, but for the corporate side that engage the law firms, how come you haven't marketed to that crowd?
Right, so helping corporate clients select lawyers, you mean? Like
One use.
How well, yeah. This is also, I mean, another area that's super interesting. But right now we're just trying to focus on legal risk for really specific groups, and especially for litigation funding. There is no tool right now that does this for them, right? And this is we find that's insane. There should be a great quantification. There should be some sort of quantitative analysis that goes into the process. So
yeah, I think there are like Lex Machina, I think is very focused on the IP space, but I do believe they're also working with litigation firms in terms of providing more kind of data-driven analysis around IP litigation cases.
The first forays are being made, right? Like even the big guys like Bloomberg Law, they're all getting interested in this. But so far, we think that a lot of the competition simply doesn't get at the heart of the problem, right? Because the heart of the problem is about actually understanding what happens down the line. It's not just about judge motions and judge analytics, like understanding how long a case will take. It's about understanding, based on the facts and law of a case, how risky that case is, right? And putting this all together with the judge analytics, and then to provide one completely intuitive and specifically tailor-made analysis for this particular market.
Mm-hmm.
How would you?
Maybe so. Okay, I think Tara had a question, and then Bruce also, but we're already a little bit over time. So if you could be very quick with your questions, that'd be great.
Yeah, have you thought about how you would offload trust of a system like this?
Trust in what sense?
Well, so if a system like this is there's an assumed trust and an assumed lack of bias, but it's still operated by a set of individuals. So there's still inherently a focus of trust towards that. Has there been any thought as to how that could be mitigated for liability?
So you're asking, how we deal with liability in terms of the decisions we make to build the system?
Or the system itself, if there, is there any thought on how the system itself can inherently provide something like a trustless framework?
Right. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand what you mean by a trustless framework.
So we're used to blockchain stuff.
Okay.
We can talk about
Good segue on that one.
That's the other question.
Great segue.
I'm always, this is the classic meme of, AI and looking at blockchain being like, oh, wow, I wish I was doing a blockchain.
When are you guys going to start doing blockchain?
I know. Doing an ICO next month, I'm joking.
Have a trading system based on the outcomes.
How do you train the system based on the outcome?
Yes.
Prediction market?
So they're different. There's basically two different sets of factors that you want to analyze. One is this metadata that you've also seen in the papers I presented, right? So things about judges, litigators, parties. It actually matters a lot which president that appointed the judge. That's one clear feature we use. American judicial system, very interesting. And the other point is this merits of the case, facts, law, and how judges usually treat those facts in that particular area of law. And you put those things together, and you have a very good feature space that you can use to make very high accuracy predictions.
Or you can have a system where the litigants bet on themselves or against themselves to signal how confident they are in the outcome of the case, to deter the other party from going further. So if I bank against myself or for myself, that says something about how likely do I think I will win, and maybe will influence the outcome of the settlement.
Absolutely, right? Like litigators' confidence is also something that I think a couple of other firms are using in order to, kind of crowdsource an understanding of the risk in the case.
Okay, Bruce.
I wonder, have you presented these findings to the judges? Have you gone to a judges conference and shown them this? And it's not just a sort of a hypothetical. I think when the judges appoint mediators, this would be an important thing to see of how the decision actually results or not. So I wonder when you're going to do that and what reaction you get other than being shown the door.
Interesting, very, very good question. So the way we came up with this theory is by interviewing judges. We went to judges and asked them, how do you come to a decision, right? And they explained a lot that when a case comes up, they kind of already intuitively know what they think the answer should be. And then obviously they craft it according to legal rules, and there are some cases where they don't have any discretion, but usually they have an understanding of how they want the case to go. And in terms of presenting this to judges, the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. Just 2 weeks ago, I was at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, and I spoke with some Dutch judges there, and they were incredibly positive about this because they thought, yeah, this is a great tool to make things transparent. It reflects what we're doing. Sure, not everyone's on board with this, and some people say, okay, look, can this AI feel emotions of a specific plaintiff who's had a terrible life, and can it really understand what's just? But overall, the experience has been very positive with judges. Of course, to add one more sentence, I'll be very brief. This is probably the last thing that will be the last area where this technology will be used, simply because it's politically extremely sensitive, right? Litigation funders, insurance companies have clear added value, have clear interest in doing this. Until it goes to the point where we can automate judges, there's tons of political work to be done.
I have a final question, if that's okay.
All right, Jameson.
Sorry about that.
Final question.
Have you thought about the impact of the knowledge of certain biases? If you make the judge aware of their biases, the potential for them to correct against it, or to impact the way that they, and then rerunning, I guess, the data to continue to train it to evolve with the judge's thinking.
That's a great point, and that's exactly what I was trying to explain earlier when I was talking about first understanding what happens and then improving what happens. Exactly this, right? Because when you've shown that there's a certain bias in the way the system works, and then judges can go in and say, okay, look, this was the bias, then exactly by what you mentioned, by having judges correct those decisions, or maybe even taking them out of the analysis, then you can improve the way that this system would model justice. Right, and that's exactly what needs to happen in that transition.
Got it. Thanks.
All right, Ludwig, thank you so much. Keep us posted.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really sorry I'll have to drop out now because I'm flying to Vienna early morning tomorrow, and it's a little bit late here. Terribly sorry. I'll watch. I hope it goes on YouTube again, so I can watch it again.
Yes, well, great. Have a great time in Vienna, one of my favorite places. And thanks again for joining us. And we'll turn it over to Quantstem, because we're already sort of 10 minutes late. I think we should just go 10 minutes over today, so you have like a full half hour. I feel some of the questions, some of the overtime questions came from you. I feel a little bit less. So why don't we turn it over to who's gonna start us off? Steve?
I am.
Okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Great. And does this full screen? Oh, okay. Okay, it's all set?
Yep, we're good.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. So my name is Stephen Stewart, not Jan. Jan is a researcher at QuantStamp. I'm borrowing his slides. In fact, his slides, it's actually quite a lengthy presentation with a lot of technical problems presented. I am not going to go into great detail on those. I'm actually going to skim through them, but I think in doing so, I can highlight some interesting things about problems we're working on. Myself, who does not have a legal background, but whereas Olga and Linda do, and many other people here, you might want to think about this concept of a smart contract from the perspective of a lawyer, what that might mean. Whereas for myself, a smart contract is a computer program. And so that's how I tend to think about it. And so the inspiration for QuantStamp, and I kind of don't know how familiar people are here with blockchain, with the notion of smart contracts. But in a nutshell, Jared earlier was talking about trustlessness, where trustless doesn't mean I don't trust you. It actually means trust is not required. The absence of the need of trust in order to use the system and trust the results. So the Ethereum platform, which has been around for a couple of years, is said to be a trustless, or to implement a trustless protocol. So basically, besides the concept of cryptocurrency or programmable money, you have this notion of smart contracts. Smart contracts, programs that run on this protocol effectively, they implement business logic, and the execution of this code, the network actually comes to a consensus on the output of that code and agrees that it is correct, and there you go. You have this world computer that basically carries out or enforces the encoded rules of the smart contract. And so it's not perfect though. So what you see here, hacking of more than $50 million, this refers to an incident. People often refer to it as the Dao Incident or the Dao hack. This notion of a decentralized autonomous organization, a lot of funds were raised for it, and then a hacker came by, read the contract, realized there was a backdoor into it to start stealing all the funds out, ATM withdrawal style. It's an exploit called a reentrancy exploit. So I'm the CTO of QuantStamp. We're a security company, and our focus is the security of smart contracts. And this was one of the inspirations for it. And there are others. The batch overflow, I'll skip through that. We did Y Combinator, the winter 18 session. That was a very important period of time. So myself and my co-founder, Richard Ma, it was a period of time where we really were able to start building our team and think about focusing our mission. And so we came out of it realizing, yeah, we're a security company developing a protocol for smart contract verification. So, well, what does that mean? Well, I'm going to skip through some of this. So the protocol itself, we're solving a problem called verification at scale. It's interesting to me from the previous discussion and thinking about the idea of automated judgments, because in a sense, that's what the Ethereum network does. Different nodes will say, hey, we have a smart contract. So you see here, it says the concept of verifiers. You have these verifiers who are basically looking at the results of the computations and saying, yes, you did it, this is correct. There's no deception, or no, there's deception here. In a sense, they're kind of an automated judge, but there's thousands of them all around the world. And without getting into the economics of it, they're incentivized to do their work correctly, because actually to be a bad actor, we're reading Jared's text messages here, is very costly. It's very hard to actually fool the network. You have to have a great amount of computing power to do it. That's by design. So QuantStamp, what we're doing is another kind of verification, if you will. When the code is written, we'll call it a contract. So if you think of it as a contract, I think of it as a computer program. Software developers write this code. They try to use best practices. They may have a specification. They're trying to get the code to match the specification. And maybe they do some code reviews. They do some debugging. They think they got it right. They deploy it to the network. Once it's deployed, it's immutable. So basically that means when it's on the network, you can't change it anymore. It's permanent. That's why a hacker can come along, has lots of time to study it, find a loophole. And it actually raises an interesting question. There's this notion of code is law. It's highly debated in the Ethereum community. So when the DAO hack happened, obviously a lot of funds were at stake and were lost. Well, if code is law, meaning if the way that program was written, that's a contract, it should be good the way it was written. Okay, it was somebody made a mistake when they wrote it, but so what? That's how it was written. That's the contract that everyone agreed to when they began submitting their funds into the decentralized autonomous organization. Now, I think it's pretty clear that the intentions of the smart contract developer were not to permit a hacker to come in and steal the money, unless the developer was the hacker. But, so when we talk about software verification at Quantstamp, we're actually doing another level of verification. We are attempting to detect these back doors that would allow this. Basically, there are two problems. You can have, we'll call it a loophole that allows funds to be stolen, or a loophole that basically does a denial of service, basically by some manner makes it so that nobody can access those funds, effectively removing them from the supply. So we build code analyzers to try to detect when these situations can happen. Pardon me, I'm recovering from a cold here. So there's a couple of challenges that we're working on, software verification at scale, which is kind of what I was referring to, and this notion of verifying the verifiers. So what we're doing is building a network, what we're calling a trustless network, which actually means a network you can trust, where the verifiers, so those who actually analyze the code and then check the code, they themselves are verified. And there's this into the technical details. I'm skipping ahead here. We're calling it interesting problems. What happens is, imagine, with our network, we produce what are called security reports or audit reports. And the report basically says, hey, we checked all these things in your smart contract, and it's either good or it's not good. There might be some warnings. We may have found vulnerabilities. But different nodes in the network might produce a different result. We expect them to produce the same result if they're honest and assuming they have the same set of tools at their disposal. But if we have two different reports, what effectively is represented here, we call it the verification game. We have to somehow find out who's right. So you can execute code, what we say on-chain, so actually on the Ethereum network, but you can also execute code off-chain. And when it's off-chain, it's kind of in the not trustless world, in the world where anything can happen, and you need to kind of bridge the gap. So we have two reports that came in from the Quantstamp network off-chain, and they're different. So we play this, what we call the verification game. These boxes here, sorry, there's two reports, one on top of the other here. They're two different reports. The boxes here are supposed to represent what we call an execution trace. A computer program executes sequentially a series of instructions. So box green is the beginning of the program, and the red box is the end, and red indicates a difference between the two traces. And you can play this game, it's called a binary search. You go to the middle, everything still matches, we're good, we go to the right. Now we found out where the two traces diverge. And so because we trust when execution is done on-chain, you hand this information over to a smart contract. So for example, on the Ethereum network, and you say, okay, now run the analyzer from everything from that first red block onward, and we're going to see who was honest, who actually ran the analyzers in an honest manner. And in doing so, we push most of the hard computation, hopefully off-chain, which is cheaper to do, and then we resolve the differences on-chain, which is more expensive. Why is it expensive? Because you have a world computer, and Ethereum has this notion of gas, and you pay using the Ether cryptocurrency, you pay for every operation that's performed. So I'm kind of giving you a window into how we're technically tackling this problem of performing off-chain computation and verifying it, but without verifying it at the expense of that you would incur if you ran the whole thing on the world computer. the Ethereum platform. So skipping ahead here, I mean, we have, and actually, if I go back here, you notice the question here, who judges this game? So the smart contract I referred to, you can think of as a judge, but it's actually fairly unambiguous. It's certainly, I don't think it maps very well to how an actual judge would make a decision, but basically it's compare the instructions and then run the instructions from the point where they diverge and see who was honest, if only it worked that way in real life. But it is effectively like a judge. And so some of the other problems we're working on is this notion of what we call decentralized bug bounties. So another way to have security checks done on your smart contract is to basically go out to the world and say, hey, before I deploy this contract, like before I stamp it, is there anybody out there who can find a problem with this code, a bug, a vulnerability? If there is, I have a bounty for you. If you can hack my smart contract before I deploy it, I'll give you this reward. Now, there is a problem with bug bounties. It's called the fair exchange problem. So basically, here it shows there's a bug and there's a reward and there's time. So the bug, so if you read time from top to bottom here, so vertically, first the bug is found and then the reward is given. That makes sense. But what if you find the bug, you sort of hand it over to the person and they say thank you and they walk away and they don't give you the reward? That would be unfair. And then it's also possible, let me see here. Oh yeah, in this scenario, okay, in the other scenario, the contract owner says, oh great, you found a bug, here's the reward. And the bounty hunter says, thank you very much, takes the money and runs. And then you could somehow try to do the exchange simultaneously. Keep in mind, I'm talking about doing this on a computer. So this is what we call the fair exchange problem. And it's a problem we're trying to solve. It's actually not an easy problem. You're exchanging data effectively, and it's kind of like a standoff. So you could imagine the bug is just a bunch of zeros and ones. So I could start sending you that information. The bounty is a token or a cryptocurrency. It's also just data. So you start transferring this information, and at some point someone says, okay, you've given me enough information, and they stop sending it. So this is what we call the fair exchange problem, and it's another problem we're working on. So how do we ensure a fair transfer of bugs and funds? Sounds like it's easy, but it's actually not. There is a solution to this problem, but the current solution assumes that the data being transferred is unimportant. So you can have the exchange of information, but it doesn't validate that the information is what it's supposed to be. So you could send the data and it turns out you didn't actually provide the bug. It was just like some random data. So still an open problem.
Is there some kind of an escrow kind of approach that you could take? Or?
Yeah, and so I mean, one approach, sure, the funds are held in escrow, and then you can have some kind of judge, some kind of mediator who evaluates it. And there are some dApps, decentralized apps, that do this kind of thing. There's one that I just can't think of the name of. Do you have an idea, Jared? There's one we audited, and they do this kind of thing. I just can't remember the name at the moment. And something else that we're interested in, we're calling it continuous security. So basically, once a smart contract is deployed, as much as you try to do automated checks, you do bug bounty, it's still possible something was overlooked, or somehow something changes in the underlying technology that actually executes the smart contracts. So there's something like for Ethereum, it's called the Ethereum virtual machine. Maybe there's an upgrade to it, and that actually impacts the smart contracts and somehow exposes a vulnerability. So we're also building products that monitor smart contracts after they're deployed to look for fraudulent or unusual behavior. So one example of this has happened recently. I had an early slide about this. It was called batch overflow. So basically, someone figured out a way to trigger a situation where the supply of a token, okay, so a digital token, the supply could be altered quite dramatically by overflowing an integer. So basically, you have a certain number of bits to represent a number on a computer. And if you can overflow it, basically, so when you overflow it, it can change the supply to some dramatically different number. So somebody was able to do that, and they did it in a very specific way that caused the supply to increase dramatically. They received a huge number of tokens, and then they have a window of time where they're on a cryptocurrency exchange, and they just dump the tokens, and they get, maybe for US dollars or for Ether or Bitcoin, and they've made a bunch of money really quickly out of thin air. And so exchanges, cryptocurrency exchanges, they would like to detect this immediately so that they can halt this activity. So we're building products to actually monitor smart contracts for unusual behavior. I guess it's like being a traffic cop and seeing if someone runs a red light. And one of the other things that we're looking at post-deployment, we're interested in whether or not, we're calling it staking. So we have stakeholders for they would be like the smart contract owner or people who are supporting a project that uses a smart contract, and security experts. If a security expert comes along and says, I think your smart contract is safe, are they willing to actually stake some of their own funds, some of their own tokens, their reputation essentially? Are they willing to put that on the line just to guarantee that the smart contract is secure? If they're willing to do that, the stakeholder says, okay, if you'll do that and publicly tell everybody that my smart contract is safe, I will pay you for saying that. So we're developing a protocol where this happens. And then if an incident actually happens, like what this slide is showing, stakeholder says, actually, security expert, you were wrong. Somebody hacked me. My funds were stolen. Then the security experts who stake their own funds, they have to give up what they staked. And this is, it's a way for the stakeholder who lost their funds to reclaim their losses. So this is something else we're working on for the post-deployment stage in the life cycle of a smart contract.
It's like pre-funding your malpractice settlement.
Okay. So that's kind of a smattering of some of the technical challenges that we're addressing, that we're tackling at QuantStamp. So right now I have a team in Toronto. It's about roughly 10 individuals. I think 7 of them have PhDs, mostly from the University of Waterloo. And then in San Francisco, we have another, I think, close to 10 people, including Olga and Linda and Jared, who, Olga helps us with product and strategy, Linda particularly on the legal side, Jared's a community manager for us. So in our space, community is extremely important. It's basically the community that keeps our project alive. And we also have a business development team here as well. And we have a small team in a Tokyo office, and also a couple of developers in New York City. So we're a distributed, or we like to say decentralized team in different places around the world. It's been less than a year. It's been with Y Combinator and up to the present, it's been a pretty exciting time. So
yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
I'm gonna give a quick little demo.
Yep, so Jared has a really quick demo. This is our BetaNet product recently released. And it'll show how users can actually submit code and receive an automated audit.
Yeah, so let's say, there's a particular contract type that, maybe decide to automate it and somehow and make it automatically executable. So you have a development team, and you want to make sure that throughout the development that it's actually being, it's okay. The tools typically used for these for assisted audits are not very easy to use, and they have very weird outputs. So our protocol, it's a BetaNet at the moment, which effectively runs as nodes on other people's computers. You're submitting your smart contract through currently our web UI, but that it will soon ideally be more decentralized. You pay some QSP, and then you get a a report, which is in a readable format, which someone who is unfamiliar with these tools, which are typically used by auditors, can actually read and understand that they don't have, say, a reentrancy in their smart contract or something of the like. So pretty simply, you want to make sure you have MetaMask set up, and you want to have QSP in there.
So MetaMask is a plugin for your browser that allows you to interact with the Ethereum network for making payments.
Yeah, and so we've had it. We already have it set up. It doesn't work with Safari. It works with a lot of other browsers, however. And so once you have your QSP in there, you want to preload it into our UI. And so you have to wait for the transaction to occur. So I'm just kind of hopping back and forth here until that happens. So we'll approve that with MetaMask. And you wait for the modal to come up, and it asks, hey, do you want to spend this? I actually recommend that you change the gas fee a little bit. It automatically sets it a little too low. This is the unit by which you're paying for computation. So it's kind of a weird concept, but that's kind of how it works. Once it's accepted, we're going to get there. So I'm just trying to get it to, there we go. So it's by the time, and come on, here we go. So now it's accepted, takes a little bit. I paste my code into the area, and I have intentionally put a couple errors in there.
So of course the code, this is the smart contract.
Yep. So this is a smart contract that will hopefully live, if it's good, will live on Ethereum and be executable, but we don't want to do that yet. We want to make sure that it's okay. So we've now submitted it. And okay, it's ready to be submitted directly to the smart contract. So the UI was checking for compatibility. And then now it's, okay, do you actually want to authorize that transaction? Yes. And I'm going to change the gas price just a little bit more. Confirm. And then it submits. Hangs a little bit, but I've gone ahead and shown you what it looks like, the outputs at the end.
You want to click ahead, Jared?
And there we go. And then so it gives you a readout of it. Now we also have more readable reports available, and gives you a bit of a definition as to what these reports are. Reentrancy, transaction failure, and the like. And so then quickly like that, you can get professional level tools, Oyente and Mithril, and other analyzers that are giving you really good reports. Now, this doesn't necessarily replace at the moment a full manual audit, but it certainly gets you a lot closer to the goal than you would otherwise would, with relatively low amount of friction.
I'll just mention what happened behind the scenes was a request went to our network. Different nodes were bidding on the opportunity to perform the audit in order to receive the payment. Some node won and actually performed it and presented the result to the user.
So very, very interesting. So just to understand this right, so your service is an automated kind of audit of smart contracts for any kind of, like you can reentrancy kind of, holes in the code that would make it sort of less secure.
Yes.
But then one thing you mentioned, Steve, before is that there might be, I don't know if there already are, or there might be in the future, providers on the blockchains, smart contract providers who might want to make a promise to their users that they are safe, and then you view yourself as like the company that facilitates that kind of analysis. But I'm, as a lawyer, I can't help sort of thinking about how do the potential liabilities run there in terms of like, what if there's still a hole in a backdoor in that contract? Who's on the hook, and how did you guys kind of manage that?
I mean, it's a great question. I mean, from our point of view, we make it very clear what we check for. Mm-hmm. So there's a certain class of problems that are detectable today. Mm-hmm. And there's actually only about a half dozen or so. The tools that we use, interestingly, so we use what are called formal verification tools, and they actually generate mathematical proofs. So it's possible these tools could have bugs. That's always possible. Of course, they've had bugs, and bugs have been fixed many times. But what you can do is provide a mathematical proof that shows that actually this bad state of your program within the class of detectable problems is unreachable. And here is actually a trace from an analyzer program that proves to you that it's not possible to reach that state. Now, there are limitations to those tools. And I'm a software engineer and a computer scientist. I can tell you that there are really hard problems that might be solvable by a formal verification tool, but it might take years of program execution. But in practice, it's pretty fast, actually. We certainly can't make absolute guarantees that the code does not have some kind of vulnerability, either a vulnerability we just don't know about yet, or a vulnerability that exists at a different level in kind of the execution model. For example, I mentioned the EVM that actually executes the code. It's possible, for example, that there's a bug in the EVM that introduces a vulnerability in smart contracts that we can't detect. So, security is just a really hard problem in general.
Sure, yeah.
And so people who are trying to attack the code, they're thinking of it from every angle possible.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so how big is the demand for your services at this point? You said, there's smart contracts providers that are your potential customers, but then there's also exchanges and then there's, companies that issue coins. How much demand do you already see, and from what groups of blockchain actors do you see most demand?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It's evolving. So we definitely perceive that we're early in the space. Certainly, you mentioned exchanges. Cryptocurrency exchanges are very interested in this kind of technology. So we get a lot of interest there. Also, enterprises who are kind of in an early stage of investigating blockchain and how they might use smart contracts. We have a number of conversations with enterprises such as these. And then where we're hoping the demand will really evolve is in the developer community. So right now there are, I think our slides say 2 million smart contracts. I think that number has increased since we created our slides. I've heard as high as 5 million. So this is the number of smart contracts on the Ethereum network. I'm not sure how closely you follow different dApps. There's one called CryptoKitties, which is one of the most popular ones where you can have your own collectible kitty on the blockchain. That's actually one of the most popular dApps right now, and I think the daily usage is in the hundreds. So we're very, very early for adoption. But we think being early is advantageous in the security space because we get to basically develop our technology, learn from all the mistakes of developers out there right now. In fact, one of the major things we do is we do manual code audits for example, companies who are issuing their own digital token. They often come to us to review their code. Combination of automatic analysis and manual code review. This actually educates our engineers so that we can build better analyzers. So I think adoption is going to take time. We're super early.
Did you get funding from VCs or something?
The QuantStamp protocol is a tokenized application, and we raised funds via a token late last year. Yeah.
Oh, you did an ICO? Okay.
Yeah.
At a time during the euphoria?
During the
fall?
euphoria?
Yeah, I mean, when people weren't rational and they were, not to say yours is
2017.
appropriate. Yeah, at the end of 2017 was a great time to raise funds in an ICO. That's when you did yours?
Late 2017. Yeah.
Great.
Right at the end.
Yeah, good job.
Quick question, I mean, maybe naive, but in the off-chain legacy world, I mean, enterprises would have QA teams, presumably, and business assurance people and auditors, and there's UL, all kinds of independent auditors that can audit for ISO 9000 and all kinds of quality-related stuff. So I would assume your community is not comprised of enterprises per se, like you said, but this independent developer network.
Yeah, and one of the advantages at the moment being, long term we're not Ethereum based, but at the moment we are, is that's where the largest developer community is. So when there's people and industries coming into smart contract development, 9 times out of 10 they're coming to the Ethereum community first. So being a part of a developer's workflow sets habits that can help long-term being part of that.
But are there efforts on the blockchain similar to sort of the ISO standards, that sort of thing? Or?
So there's a number of efforts we're helping set standards through the Alliance and also within the ETH security community.
Mm-hmm.
It's still very early stages. I mean, this is a very evolving space. But actually, what we're hoping to get to, at least within the working group, is a risk assessment model over the next few months.
Mm-hmm.
So
Actually,
a couple of
Philippa,
ways to look at
Mm-hmm.
standards. One is on the developer side,
Mm-hmm.
but the other side, and predominantly a lot of smart contracts right now are in ICOs.
Mm-hmm.
We do predict that the smart contracts will be adopted by enterprises, and to that extent, we also want to provide guidance to other people who will use smart contracts in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
So we are to some extent focused on developers, but we're actually even more focused on helping people who are starting out, want to learn, want to release their first smart contract into the wild,
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that their funds are not stolen, and that they're successful. And there are some use cases, like for example, game companies have been effectively using smart contracts inside the games for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other use cases for other enterprises to tokenize various services. And so we are working with prospective clients, with exchanges and companies that are doing ICOs to really educate them about what smart contracts are and how what you do before, during, and after deployment to make sure that your funds or whatever digital assets you have are safe.
Cool.
Just getting back to the ISO question, you may be familiar with Philippa Ryan's work with ISO to develop blockchain standards for ISO. She's in our blockchain
Oh,
group.
okay.
Yeah, we do have a.
She reached out to me. She asked me to join, actually.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, we have a blockchain group that meets every other week,
Mm-hmm.
and we just launched a blockchain journal.
Yeah.
Stanford Journal on Blockchain Law and Policy. So
And
check that out.
and Matt, the editor at one of the conferences.
Steve,
Yes.
Steve and Tony, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, great, yeah. So great. So so that's really fascinating. It's really interesting what you guys are working on. We're already, unfortunately, like 12 minutes over our time. So really appreciate you coming in and telling us about your work and yeah, please keep us posted. And good luck with everything. So
Thank you. Really appreciate
all right,
it.
thanks again. We'll be again meeting next Thursday at 1:30.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Susan and Jameson are going to be running the meeting. I will be at a big congress in Brasilia at the time. I'll be joining remotely from there, hopefully. But who's coming next week?
So we have one presenter, I believe, Johan Schultes, and then we have a couple of presenters from the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Innovation Startup and Residence Program. So City Innovate works with the Mayor's Office, and we have Jay Nath, who's I think the executive director of City Innovate, used to be head of the Mayor's Office of Innovation, and then we also have a presenter from the Mayor's Office of Innovation, so they'll
Super.
present on that program.
Cool. All right, so see you all next week. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.